Welcome to the Significance of Wealth podcast, where we explore the evolving landscape of wealth management, private investments, and collecting as both a passion and potential investment strategy. In each episode, host Tom Ruggie, founder and CEO of Destiny Family Office, discusses these topics with industry experts, providing insights into the unique challenges and opportunities associated with managing significant assets. I'm Marty Salt. Today's guest is Brian Hughes, one of the most respected voices in the family office and family wealth advisory space. He is president of Eton Advisors, a boutique multifamily office serving ultra-high net worth families, and brings over 30 years of experience advising families of significant wealth. Brian previously held leadership roles at Pitcairn and Threshold Group and went on to advise more than 75 firms nationwide through his consultancy, Hughes Growth Strategies. He also serves on the advisory board and faculty of the Ultra High Net Worth Institute, where he helped develop the 10 domains of family wealth framework we'll explore in today's conversation. And now here's your host, Tom Ruggie.
So today I have with me Brian Hughes. I have known Brian for quite a number of years now. We initially met via a marketing firm that Brian and his partner Gregory Roll owned, and our firm, our family office, utilized Brian's firm to help us with some marketing initiatives and also just the build out of our multifamily office here at Destiny. Brian's since moved on to another role, which he'll tell you a little bit about when he introduces himself, but he is the president of Eton Advisors, which is a family office in North Carolina. Yet, even with that, Brian and I still maintain a very close relationship, and he still works with me a little bit on our never-ending continual quest for improvement and perfection in our family office build-out. But Brian has been a great resource, a great friend, and somebody I'm very happy to have with us today. So, Brian, if you could, maybe give us a little bit more of a background about yourself, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Tom. First of all, great to see you again. And I'm just honored to be on your podcast. Just for our audience's benefit, Gregory and I worked very closely with you and your team to actually launch this podcast. I don't know how long it's been ongoing, but it's been obviously very successful. And I'm just, as I said, thrilled to be part of what you've created here, which I think is incredible content in so many different areas. So thanks again for allowing me to be part of this program. So just by way of background, I've spent my entire career in wealth management, but really the last 21 years in more of the family office space when I joined Pitcairn, Philadelphia-based multifamily office in Philadelphia. I was actually brought on board by Leslie Voth, who has since retired, but to really grow that commercial family office. Pitcairn started as a single family office, so one of the few family offices today that actually started from a single family office. And I think they're celebrating their 100th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken, or did last year. So from there, I moved on because George Russell, who is the founder of Russell Investments, the creator of the Russell Indexes, sold that business in 1999 and created a single family office for himself and his 4 adult children and his late wife, Jane. And then in 2004, he decided he had so many inquiries from friends and other successful entrepreneurs to manage their wealth. He opened a commercial family office called Threshold Group. I joined Threshold in 2008 and helped grow that business from about $1.5 billion to $3 billion in my time there. Went from 12 clients to 55. So I've had a lot of fun in the multifamily office space, but then in 2012, I decided to start my own consulting firm, Hughes Growth Strategies, working with firms like yours. And over the last 12 years, in combination with Gregory Roll at Touchpoint, we worked with over 75 firms around the country, serving the ultra high net worth, primarily accounting firms, law firms, multifamily offices, technology firms, philanthropic advisory firms. But the one thing they all had in common, Tom, is they all served the same marketplace, the ultra high net worth, multi-generational family. And then, as you mentioned, I joined Eton Advisors, who I've known for 15 years when they started the firm. Actually, I admit I did a really terrible job of recruiting the 3 founders of Eton Advisors because they came to our offices in Gig Harbor, Washington in 2009. And after meeting with us, they decided to start their own firm. So apparently didn't do a good job, but basically they hired Sarah Hamilton from Family Office Exchange to help them figure out what they should be doing next after leaving. Yeah. I feel very fortunate to be part of a great boutique multifamily office, as you mentioned, based in North Carolina and Chapel Hill specifically. Having a lot of fun working with the team.
Well, then going back to your question regarding the podcast, I think that you and Gregory suggested that we do a podcast for about the last 3 or so years, but I don't think we executed it until about a year and a half ago, beginning of last year. So eh, at least we got
Well,
it going.
got it going, and it's
Yeah.
been very successful. And I don't know if you remember, Tom, who came up with the name The Significance of Wealth, but
I'm going to guess since you're bringing it up, it was probably you.
that was me.
Yeah, well, that's a great name. Today, what we're going to talk about, it's a topic that you and I discuss an awful lot. And to some extent, it's part of as we continue to discuss and build out what we're doing here at Destiny Family Office. We're using this as somewhat of a prototype to help to continue to elevate what our needs are and what we're looking at. And it's called the 10 Domains of Family Wealth. It was put out by the Ultra High Net Worth Institute, of which you and I are both members of. And I know that you're extremely familiar with the topic. So, what I think we're going to do is just go over the 10 pillars, go over each of them individually, get some thoughts from you, and we'll go from there. So, the first question that I would have for you is from a family office standpoint, such as ours, such as yours over there at Eton, what do you think having or utilizing as a base foundation of the 10 domains, how has that benefited what you're doing? And of course, in turn, how it will benefit what we're doing as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Great question. And I can give a little background on the Institute in a moment, but I'll answer your question directly first. And that is when we think about families of wealth, whether they're high net worth, which we could define as kind of 10 million to 50 million, and ultra high net worth, which is really the 30 million plus of investable wealth, these families are really looking for more than just an investment solution. And I think the start and the founding in 2018, of which I was part of, the beginning group that Steve Prestano came to myself and a handful of other people that helped founded this not-for-profit kind of think tank, if you will, was in response to the families themselves and advisors being really confused in the marketplace by all these different service models. So to bring it back to the 10 domains, I was actually part of the subcommittee that created the 10 domains back in 2018, 2019. And it really centered around the fact that the advisor is really the connection between the family and not just their wealth, but all other aspects of how they manage their wealth, even in non-financial ways. So what's important about it is it's a way to really understand how to serve these families by going beyond just the investments or just the financial capital and really looking at all the different ways advisors themselves, whether it's an accountant or an attorney or a wealth advisor or a philanthropic advisor, how they can integrate their services to better serve families was also a way to really maybe pull back the veil of the opaqueness of the wealth management space. It's hard for families to discern between what's the difference between Destiny Family Office and Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan and Crescent, right? And so this was really an initiative, the Ultra High Net Worth Institute was an initiative to bring more clarity to both the advisors and how they should be serving clients and families to really make distinctions on what an integrated wealth advisor is.
And the 10 pillars is really, it has what I call the family advisory relationship as the center. And then there's 9 spokes around that, which we're going to discuss each of those. And then it's somewhat cut in half, but speak a little bit on kind of the role, if you will, of the family relationship advisor and why that role is so important to these families.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, if you think about this as a wheel with the family advisor in the center of that wheel, controlling all the other disciplines around it that we call domains. And the advisor is really the expert generalist, if you will. And the advisor is the one who is really integrating all these other service providers and all these other areas of expertise that we'll get into in the other 9 domains. And as you mentioned, the way that the ultra high net worth has structured these 10 domains is there's the kind of a cluster at the top, which is 4 domains that are called the wealth creation and stewardship cluster. And those are around the financial assets, if you will. And then the bottom half are the non-financial areas. There's 5 domains that cover the cultivation of family capital. And we'll get into, maybe we can dig into some of those. But the most obvious ones are the top 4, and that's really managing the financial wealth. And what's included in those 4 domains is you have the financial and investment management, which is really the world that you live in and the world I live in, certainly day in, day out. And that's tax planning, investment planning, etc. And then you have estate planning and legal issues. And then you have risk management, which could be insurance. It could be many other areas of risk management. And then you have social impact and philanthropy. So those are really the 4 top domains in that first cluster called wealth creation and stewardship.
Yeah, and we're actually going to tackle relatively briefly, but each of those domains.
Yeah. So go back to the advisor real quick, right? And so the crux of what was trying to be solved here is, what are all the areas that families of wealth, meaning ultra high net worth and high net worth families, what are all the areas that really need to be considered in managing their total wealth picture, that financial and the non-financial, which means who is going to be managing it? If you have a single family office, it's being managed by that single family office. But if they're with a group of advisors that's not part of a single family office, typically they're with a multifamily office or a wealth management firm. And it's incumbent upon the advisor to really manage those relationships. And hence this identification of this model called the integrated wealth management or integrated wealth advisor. And that's really the crux that's really at the heart of, if you will, of these 10 domains, is how do you manage family wealth across all of these different disparate areas?
Well, in my experience, and even from my most recent new clients within our multifamily office, is that not only are people looking for this, they want this type of service, they need this type of service, but what I found is they're having trouble actually finding the right providers that can give them really the holistic approach that they're looking for. And again, I think having just a baseline foundation or platform such as this, which I've also used within our practice and the methodology as a scorecard, but that helps us to integrate every facet of a family situation into the overall planning. So with that, you mentioned that the first portion is the wealth creation and stewardship, and you mentioned that there's the 4 primary spokes that encompass that. So if we can, let's talk about each of those spokes in a little bit more detail. And I know that you know what they are. You've already read them off, but I'll prompt you a little bit. And again, we'll just spend a few minutes on each one and we'll go from there. So, the first one, as you mentioned, is financial and investment management. So tell us a little bit about what, if I were a ultra high net worth family listening to this podcast, what should I be looking for and what should I expect from a firm when it comes to the financial and investment management component?
Yeah, so this is really a core set of services that relate specifically to investment management. And that could be alternative investments, it could be traditional investments, it could be real estate, and any other assets that kind of form the financial wealth of the family.
Could even be collectibles that we've spoken together about multiple times.
And yeah, exactly. Collectibles certainly being part of that.
Yeah.
But also includes tax planning and the related kind of management of, if you will, of those assets, the buying and selling of those assets, overall asset allocation when it comes to investment management. But as an advisor yourself, tax planning for these families is critically important, even from a tax standpoint, as far as managing the portfolio itself in a tax advantaged way. So the financial and investment management piece is really a core set of services that most wealth advisors provide. And in fact, There's probably a very large percentage of firms out there today that this is all they do.
Right.
They really don't do anything else, that this is their core business. And so in the world of the Ultra High Net Worth Institute in relation to the 10 domains, they would be considered special advisor, if you will, or an advisor that really has a core focus and would not be considered an integrated wealth manager.
Right. Well, and another thing that I happen to see a lot of recently is the what I would call the sudden infusion of liquidity. So a liquidity event from selling a business or something along that line. So moving on, the second area is estate planning, legal issues.
Yeah. Again, another kind of core set of services that some wealth management firms do provide at least an area of expertise when it comes to estate planning and tackling legal issues. Most firms don't practice law in this area. They'll partner with an outside legal firm or team or set of experts, depending on the type of law. But they do have a lot of firms do have some in-house expertise, whether it's their wealth advisors who have a law degree, much like they might have wealth advisors who have a tax degree, where they can review documents and start to make recommendations related to estate planning techniques and strategies for the family. But again, as most of these firms don't actually practice law, they don't draft documents, that they'll actually outsource that to other. And that's when you really start to talk about, well, what does it mean to be an integrated wealth advisor? Again, the way the Institute looks at it, having financial and investment management and estate planning and covering legal issues does not make you an integrated wealth advisor.
Well, and as most high net worth and ultra high net worth people don't really have the time or desire to tackle these issues on their own. And so, again, I think an important aspect that we bring to the table, you and your firm included, is just the overall coordination, oversight, and really taking a lot of the heavy lift off the clients from the legal and estate tax planning arena.
Yeah, and I think this is an area, Tom, where I think it goes one step further, right? Where the advisor themselves within the firm can actually start to make some recommendations as far as what are some of the tax strategies or estate planning or wealth transfer strategies that families that they work with would use to help create those multi-generational families of wealth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good point. Third is risk management. And yeah, I don't mind saying when it comes to this, you actually have been in the process of working with our firm over the last couple of months now to help tie this together for us. You've brought to the table multiple different firms that focus on the ultra high net worth market from a risk management standpoint. And like I typically do when we're taking on a service offering like that, vetting the remaining two that are standing myself, and they're actually going to do all the work on my own portfolio before we determine who we want to work with and who we want to recommend for our clients. But understanding that, give us a little feedback on the risk management component, what that covers.
Yeah. So again, each of these are areas that are quite important when you're talking about ultra high net worth families and multi-generational families. But specifically, we're talking about primarily property casualty insurance, but also any other risk related to education and security, reputational risk, real estate risk. So having a partner, either internally or externally, to be able to cover all of those areas, not limited to just insurance and not limited to just a specific area insurance, but really looking at all areas of risk management for the family. And I'll just give you a quick example. A lot of families that you work with and that we work with travel internationally, right? So traveling internationally might seem pretty straightforward when it comes to you get travel insurance, but what about if you're traveling to an underdeveloped country and you need evacuation, right? Is there a partner out there who works exclusively in this space that can not just insure you, but to make sure that you have boots on the ground when needed, or being able to get you out of harm's way, or being able to get you to a physician in an emergency? Things like that are, again, they may be kind of far-fetched and unusual, but that is an area where risk management comes into play for families of significant wealth because they travel a lot. But that's just
Absolutely.
one small example.
Yeah, that's a great example. And again, I would summarize this with the importance of not only having the ability to evaluate holistically the risks involved, but also to have the ability to utilize multiple companies to help fulfill those needs. And certainly, as we went through our vetting process, that was two of the things that we were looking at. So then, finally, the fourth area is the social impact and philanthropy.
This is, again, it's an area where the intersection of wealth itself and the desires and needs and vision of the family when it comes to doing good, as opposed to just doing well from a financial standpoint, but doing good, meaning giving back to their community, giving back globally, giving back regionally. And there's, right. So the social impact piece, how does that really align with investment portfolios, for example? Right? So instead of just having a traditional investment portfolio now, is there some sort of social return that can come along with that? And philanthropy is obviously, you and I both know it as clients who are philanthropically inclined, they want to give back, right? They want to see change, create change in either their communities, in their church, in their alma mater, or something more, something bigger than that, maybe solving some global crisis or food or hunger, I should say, all sorts of issues, but they can put their dollars to actually solve some problems. Well, how do you do that as just an investment advisor? So again, bringing in that expertise that gives families the ability to align their investments and their giving so they can actually solve some of these problems. Now, that this actually becomes a much bigger issue when it comes to the next generation of our families of wealth, right? Where it's really the next and future generations that are more interested in kind of social impact. Not to say that their parents aren't interested in it, but certainly we see the children and the grandchildren of our wealth owners really have a much keener focus on how do we turn this significant wealth that we have and turn it into doing good or solving problems.
Yeah. And the other component there that we talk about a lot is obviously there can be significant tax advantages to quite a number of different charitable opportunities, whether it's a donor advised fund or setting up your own foundation or a GRAT or anything along those lines. I always do say you don't let the tax tail wag the dog. Yet, if somebody is somewhat charitably inclined, and then when you evaluate the tax benefits, that can get somebody around the corner that might not be as charitably inclined to do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think we're seeing more and more families today having a much bigger interest in aligning their investments with their giving. And therefore, they get that benefit of the tax advantage of being able to do it.
Right.
But that's more of a cherry on top of the cake, if you will.
Absolutely. So we got through the first cluster. Now we have the second cluster, which has five more. I'm going to call them spokes. But that second cluster is the cultivation of family value. Before I prompt you on the spokes, is there anything you'd like to say broadly regarding the cultivation of family value?
Yeah. So I'm going to correct you. It's the cultivation of family
It
capital.
is. You are correct.
Yeah, that's okay. But again, so just at a very high level, when you separate the financial service models of these firms that serve clients, where you're focused on investments and taxes and estate planning and wealth transfer planning and even philanthropy and risk management, when you separate that, you're left with what's it all for, right? What's the purpose of the money? Right? What's the purpose of the wealth? And so, and how do you operate in a system so that money does not dissipate from one generation to the next? And of course, Jay Hughes, the author of Family Capital, Keeping It in the Family.
On a relation.
No, Jay's a friend, but we're not related. But Jay has been a pioneer in getting families to really think about what it takes to actually perpetuate wealth from one generation into future generations. He talks about the 100-year family, if you will. So there's a lot that goes into that, and we'll dive into each of these kind of spokes. But I like to think of this as what's called the cultivation of family capital. I like to think of this as what's the money for? And how does this wealth continue to be a perpetual source for tools for the family for future generations where they're not spending this capital in one generation?
Yep. So with that, we'll dive into the first one, which is governance and decision making.
Yeah, so again, I think all of these are really interesting, and we could probably spend an hour on each one of them. I think this is probably the area that excites me the most when working with families, and really diving into some of the areas that are more difficult for families to grapple with. And governance and decision making is really a big one. And this really involves, how does the family make decisions around their wealth? How do they make decisions around engaging their next generation in the wealth? How do they make decisions around their family business and the capital outside their family business? So this is really about best practices and decision making. And many of the families that go deep into family governance typically have their own operating business at the same time, or a family enterprise, if you will. And they really have to balance the needs of the family and the needs of the enterprise. And those two cannot be separated if it's an owner operating family, if you will.
And I think one area you didn't mention is conflict resolution,
Mm.
because that's certainly, I know you and I could both tell dozens of stories about situations where conflict arises and what happens with that and what's the matrix to getting that taken care of and what our role is as mediator, if you will, in that situation.
Yeah, and I'll just share a very quick story if I have a minute.
Of course.
I remember back when I was at Pitcairn, we were actually working with a family, a Philadelphia-based family, where G1 patriarch passed away, but never told his kids, who were now adults in their 50s and 60s, how much wealth the family actually had. So they never had conversations about the wealth. And to cut to the chase, the three children in G2 were both astounded by the amount of wealth, because it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but also incredibly hurt by the fact that dad never shared this, and they were ill prepared for this significant influx of wealth that would move to their generation. To say that they were unhappy about it is an understatement, and they created a huge amount of conflict because, again, they were unprepared. So having a good governance structure, having great communication, and knowing when to start to share this information is a huge part of family governance and healthy families that have this significant wealth.
Yeah, that's a great example, because in my Tiger 21 group, that's a commonality that everybody has, is how are we best preparing? Not do we prepare, but how do we prepare? Because how do we prepare is such a difficult question, and every family has different dynamics, but it's something that must be addressed, because otherwise you might as well just be blind as far as how to move forward.
Yeah, and that can really stop a family in its tracks and set a family back, if you will, if you're
For sure.
not preparing the next generation for the wealth to come.
And to what started that conversation, it could also create a lot of conflict, which money has a tendency to create conflict amongst heirs, and especially if you're talking about the kind of money that we're talking about, and they knew nothing about it. Yeah.
Yes, it's hard to help a family become stewards of wealth and not consumers of wealth when you're starting off on the wrong foot.
Let's go to something near and dear to me personally, which is health and well-being. And for me, I think that's what I would call the intersection of physical and mental health and well-being. But what's your take on this spoke?
Yeah, so an area that I would just say is not talked about very much, although you and I were both in Palm Beach last week for a family office forum, and it was a highlight of the conversation, as there was a session completely dedicated to health and well-being and what's going on with innovations and AI, but also some of the investments in solutions as far as disease, et cetera. To me, I know as a dad of two, I want to live a long time. I heard Dr. Dan Sullivan say 10 years ago, after doing a lot of research and being part of a research group, said that with the innovations that could happen the next 10 to 15 years, this is before AI was even talked about, that individuals could live to be 125 years old.
So you're not talking about my Dan Sullivan, who has been my entrepreneurial coach for a number of years, who has he has it all planned out for him to live to 156, but this apparently
Yeah, I apologize. Not Dan. So I said Dan Sullivan. I meant Dr. Dan Carlin, not Dan
okay.
Sullivan. Apologies. But yeah, I think with not just innovations that are happening, it's being talked about more, and there are many more resources out there for families who really want to focus on health and well-being. And multifamily offices are actually making it part of their service model where they're identifying and partnering with outside resources for health and wellness, education, concierge medicine, access to different types of health solutions or health programs. It's becoming a bigger and bigger area for families as part of their overall wealth management structure.
Yeah, I would agree. And you and I both go to quite a few family office conferences, and I cannot recall a recent conference where there was not some form of devotion strictly towards longevity planning. And along that line, I've talked to a few people regarding the integration of kind of concierge services into the family office. Candidly, I haven't been compelled to do anything with that yet. But I, as I'm sitting here, I can think of three instances, probably within the past 3 to 6 months, where I've been specifically asked by high net worth or ultra high net worth for a referral to a concierge doctor. And we do have several of those available. So it is definitely on the minds of many out there, especially for the groups that we're surrounded by.
Yeah, and even just healthcare management. The insurance, healthcare insurance is becoming unbelievably challenging just to understand and being able to navigate the healthcare system for an ill family member. You do need an outside expert to help you. And
Mhm.
fortunately, today, there are a number of great firms out there. This is all they do. They can help you navigate the healthcare system, help you find the right doctors, move all your medical data and information and put it in the right place, advocate on your behalf. It's more than just getting an appointment with a doctor. It's being able to help these individuals within these families. And families, obviously, the wealth owning generation's getting older. You're seeing more and more health problems. So the need for these services is growing and growing.
All right, let's talk about leadership and transition planning.
Yeah, so this could cover a number of different areas, but obviously, one area, just from a family wealth standpoint, is those families that have operating businesses and family enterprises, just thinking about how do you move the next generation into the family enterprise. And so this is an area, again, that continues to boom simply because the wealth owning generation is getting older and they really need to start thinking about and planning for succession. And in order to have that succession for the family business to make it successful, you need to be able to train and coach and mentor that next generation, but also find out, do they want to be part of the business or not? And what role do they want to play in the business? But you have to have a blueprint and a roadmap in order to get there. And a lot of families just don't think about it until it's too late. And they're in a situation where now you're in a crisis mode and you have to figure out, well, how is this business going to sustain itself if we've not prepared the next generation?
Yeah, and that actually segues right into, in my opinion, they could combine these two to some extent, but it is the learning, development, and the rising generation.
Yeah. So again, a lot of work has been done in the last 15 to 20 years in the specialty areas of being able to serve families in next generation wealth education. And that can start as young as, 5, 8, 10 years old in some families where you're really starting to bring on the concepts of financial literacy for these younger generations. And that could look very different for teenagers, look very different for young adults, as well as adults that are out there working out of college. So, a number of different firms that can support wealth management, multifamily offices like your own, that either you could build it internally, which a lot of firms, bigger firms have done, where they've hired trying to think of the name that they give them, but kind of chief learning officer, if you will, for families where they actually can put on education programs either directly for one family or bring lots of families together and provide wealth education. But it's becoming a critically important area to help prepare the next generation, Tom, because the sooner you start that education, the less likely you're going to run into that scenario I mentioned before where dad's in his 80s passes away. Adult children have no idea how much wealth they have, and they're ill prepared. So you can avoid all that, many of those issues that come of that, because if you're very proactive when it comes to wealth education.
And then the last spoke, which again is segues what you just talked about right into this, is family dynamics. And we've already touched on this a little bit, but I would argue that certainly in my experience, this is one of not only the most difficult areas to tackle, but also the most prevalent that you're going to run into is the interest in family dynamics. And I can give a couple of examples. Again, would love to hear what you have to say here.
Yeah, so this is an area that I'm pretty passionate about because I've seen some horror stories about and some real life examples of families that not just didn't prepare their next generation, but they didn't address the conflict that you mentioned very early in our conversation. And that was driven by so many different things. But the one area that I would identify here that's most important is understanding the fact that every family is a system, right? And if you think about family systems theory, which is Bowen is one of those educational organizations that actually thinks about the family and talks about educating family members and engaging family members and trying to understand what that family system means to each individual in the family. It is about communication. It is about healthy conflict resolution. It's about engaging, but it's being able to address all those needs that support the family so they can be a healthy family with this wealth and living with this wealth in a healthy way. And ideally, you want to be able to avoid the many issues that can happen in a family system, like divorce. How do you address that? Or substance abuse and things like that. So, family dynamics is such a critical role. To me, it's almost at the core of everything that we do as a wealth advisor, as a wealth manager. You have to understand the family system in order to help them best. It's not beneficial to the family to have a great understanding of their investments and not addressing the family system and how you're going to communicate that at the same time, and the impact of setting up these trusts and these sophisticated planning solutions for clients. If you're not going to focus on the system itself and the dynamics around that family system, including the conflict that can come from mismatched needs and expectations.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is such a core area. Even as I'm just sitting here thinking about it, I have two current situations with clients. One is I'm basically the moderator on a prenuptial agreement for a later in life second marriage. And it's been quite an interesting conversation with everybody there. And then the second one that, you always hate to talk about this, especially if you are the patriarch of the family, but is the declining mental capacity of somebody in the family and what's going to happen with that and how that's going to impact things and when does the rest of the family step in. Again, there's just so many dynamics and so much to talk about, and having a well thought out plan and having these discussions is just so central to having as smooth of a transition as possible, which is it's never going to be completely smooth, but it's like everything else. The more planning that you do, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, and I think to your earlier point about conflict, like my own family, some of us love to avoid conflict, right? And that there's no doubt that can cause not just problems in the near term, but certainly in the long term if you're not addressing it. And having a good, healthy family when it comes to communication and setting expectations and setting boundaries for family members, all that comes with great planning and having specialists in the area of family dynamics, which we're frankly, you and I are very blessed to have so many out there who really understand family systems inside and out and can really help families and be a great support if families are open to starting to have those conversations. And sometimes that's the hardest part. And unfortunately, some families wait until it's too late to address some of these issues around conflict and communication.
For sure. So we've gone through all the pillars, Brian. You've done a great job. Thank you so much. But now maybe let's talk a little bit about how to tie the bow on the package? How do you bring it all together?
Yeah, so there's obviously no one way to do this, right? And so I'll go back to this whole concept of the integrated family wealth advisor or family wealth management firm. So when I say the term integrated, when the ultra high net worth institute starts to think about integrated family wealth and start to put some definition around it, what they're really saying is that the firms that are true family wealth integrating firms address the top cluster as well as some of the bottom cluster. And how to do that, I think, is all in the type of firm that you have and the resources that you have. Do you want to build it or buy it or outsource it? Right. So most firms will cover three of the four top in the in the top cluster and identify those areas in the bottom where they either want to buy it themselves. In other words, go hire, call it that chief learning officer as a good example. Some firms have gone out specifically and done that and hired a chief learning officer or somebody in a role similar to that where they can start to bring wealth education to their next generation. They might even have somebody who works in family dynamics at the same time or in governance, right, on their team. Or if you're a firm that maybe doesn't have all the resources to be able to go out and hire people, is to be able to identify those types of firms who can really serve their clients in a way where they're really managing the entire process and it's not just a handoff. And so that's really the practicality of it is how does that really happen as far as practically?
And I think you're saying this without saying it, but I also think that having the ability to have communication, an open line of communication between all of the advisors and everybody that's involved within a family is essential. I know that's something that has certainly made a difference and had an impact for a number of our clients when we have the brain trust sitting there evaluating the situation, discussing things, and we can all come at it separately. And I can come with my ideas and think my ideas are great. But there's times where I might have a great idea, but the CPA or the attorney says, "Hey, Tom, that's a great idea, but there's an adverse tax consequence here. So what about this?" And it really becomes everybody working together, working in sync to ultimately help best prepare and educate the client for all of their needs around all of these pillars.
And I also, that's a great point, Tom. I also think it's about decision making. So, how do we help families make the best decisions? Right. In order to make the best decisions, we'll just use investment management, for example, then you need to know what structures those investments are in. And you need to know what the tax implications are and the tax ramifications are of both the structures and the investments themselves. Right. And there's so many other pieces that you need to understand the governance structures around the family. So, in order to help the family make the best decisions, you need to have the right people in the room. And so I used to think, and we've all heard this analogy of a quarterback, right? The wealth advisor quarterback. I probably heard it first, maybe even 20 plus years ago. And I think I heard an analogy a number of years ago that I think actually fits it better. And that's the wealth advisor as more of an air traffic controller. What's the job of an air traffic controller? It's to make sure that the planes take off and the planes land and they don't run into each other. Right? So there's a lot of coordination that goes on, but they also need to know where everything is. They need to know where all the planes are, right? To be able to help those planes take off and land and do it safely. And I think that's a great analogy for an integrated wealth manager is really you're not a specialist in every single area, but you're this expert generalist who knows what are the specialty areas that need to be put in place on behalf of clients, and how do you organize and manage them so that they're speaking to each other and they're helping the family make the best decisions possible by having all the information at the same time. And there's another question I used to ask when I was an advisor in my early days is I used to ask families, well, when was the last time that you had your accountant and your lawyer and your insurance agent and your investment advisor sitting in the in the room in the same room at the same time talking about you and your family?
Yeah.
And most of them would say never. And so ideally you'd want them all in the same room at the same time. And that's probably not practical, but you want essentially the same impact of that. And now you bring in the family the philanthropy consultant, and you bring in the governance specialist, and you bring in the education specialist, and you bring in other areas of risk management, there's a lot of planes that need to be managed in the air for families, but that is the definition of an integrated wealth advisor and an integrated wealth management firm.
That's a fantastic point. And of course, it's a little bit different back when you were an advisor and when I started in the business because there was no Zoom. So now we have the ability to, at least on a video screen, have everybody in the same room at the same time. And your point's well taken, as one of my quests in working with my clients is to be what I call the first call. And
Yeah.
I don't have the solution to all the issues or problems that a client may have, but I like feeling like I can be the person that they want to call because I know where to go for that. And frankly, I want them to call me not only for needs, but for good things and happy times and whatnot as well. So it's the relationship is key. But Brian, I want to close out. This has been phenomenal. I think this will be fantastic information for the people that listen to this podcast. And I want to offer if you got any closing thoughts or words that you'd like to say. But before that, I want to thank you again. I want to thank you for being a friend and somebody who I respect so much in the business.
Well, thank you, Tom. Again, it's been an honor for me to be part of your podcast and just share some insights based on my own experiences, my involvement in the Ultra High Net Worth Institute. And I think just this topic of the integrated wealth advisor, and I'll just say that hopefully the purpose of and the mission of the Ultra High Net Worth Institute is to help advisors and families really understand what's most important and how to get not just the best advice, but to get integrated advice. So they've got people on their team that are thinking about all these things to help them make better decisions and to really move wealth from generation to generation and to help families become great stewards of wealth. So it's been a lot of fun talking about it. And I can't thank you enough for allowing me to be part of your show.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up here. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tom.
That brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to Significance of Wealth on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You can also follow Tom Ruggie and Destiny Family Office on LinkedIn and destinyfamilyoffice.com for more insights on wealth management, private market opportunities, and collectibles. Until next time. The expressed views, thoughts, and opinions belong solely to the host and/or guests and are not investment recommendations or opinions issued by Destiny Wealth Partners or its affiliates. Investment advisory services are offered through Destiny Wealth Partners, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Destiny Wealth Partners also conducts business under the name Destiny Family Office. Destiny Family Office podcasts are the sole property of Destiny Family Office, and information provided is for informational and educational purposes only. Learn more at www.destinyfamilyoffice.com/disclosures.